Hey everybody, this is Jimmy from The Unusual Minds. This week on Behind the B Movie, we take a look at what is, without a doubt, one of the most bizarre entries in the filmography of Sean Connery. That's right, the post-apocalyptic sci-fi fantasy western, Zardoz. So make sure to remember that penises are bad, because we are taking a deep dive into the vortex. Zardoz is a 1974 Irish-American science fiction western fantasy film, and later a book written, produced, and directed by John Boorman, and starring Sean Connery and Charlotte Rampling, and featuring Sarah Kesselman. The film was shot by cinematographer Geoffrey Unsworth on a budget of $1.57 million. In a future post-apocalyptic Earth in the year 2293, the human population is divided into the immortal Eternals and the mortal Brutals. The Brutals live in a wasteland growing food for the Eternals, who live apart in the vortex, leading a luxurious but aimless existence on the grounds of a country estate. The connection between the two groups is through brutal exterminators who kill and terrorize other Brutals in order to serve the orders of a huge flying stone head called Zardoz, which supplies them with weapons in exchange for food they collect. Zed, played by Sean Connery, is a brutal exterminator who hides aboard Zardoz during one trip, finding his way to the realm of the Eternals called the Vortex. Boorman was inspired to write Zardoz while preparing to adapt The Lord of the Rings for United Artists. But when the studio became hesitant about the cost of producing film versions of the Tolkien books, Boorman continued to be interested in the idea of inventing a strange new world. Boorman wrote Zardoz with William Stair, a longtime collaborator. I wanted to make a film about the problems of us hurtling at such a rate into the future that our emotions are lagging behind. The original draft was set 5 years in the future and was about a university lecturer who became obsessed with a young girl who disappeared. He searched for her among communes where the girl lived. Boorman visited some communes for research. He then decided to set the story even farther in the future, a future when society collapsed and a new society had emerged. Boorman developed the society and the central character who penetrated it. He'd be mysteriously chosen and at the same time manipulated. And I wanted the story to be told in the form of a mystery, with clues and riddles which unfold, and the truth slowly peeled away. Boorman said he was influenced by writers such as T.S. Eliot, Frank Baum, and Tolkien, as well as the medieval Arthurian quests. It's about the inner rather than the outer space, said Boorman. It's closer to the better science fiction literature, which is more metaphysical. Most of the science fiction that gives the genre a bad name is adventure stories and space clothes. Boorman said nobody wanted to do it. Warner Brothers didn't want to do it, even though I'd made a shitload of money for them. His then agent David Begelman knew the head of 20th Century Fox wanted to make a film with the director. He said the executive could read the script but needed to make a decision within 2 hours. It's either yes or no, Begelman told him. You have no approvals and it's $1 million negative pickup, Boorman says. The Fox guy came to London, and I was very nervous. So I went for lunch and he read the script. He then finally came out to the back office with his head shaking, clearly with no idea of what to make of it. Begelman went straight up to him and said, "Congratulations." He never gave the poor guy a chance. In April 1973, Boorman announced the film would star Burt Reynolds and Charlotte Rampling. Reynolds had just worked with Boorman in 1972's Deliverance. However, Reynolds had to pull out due to an illness and was replaced by Sean Connery. Connery had just stopped doing the Bond films and he wasn't getting any jobs, so he came along and did it, said Boorman. Connery's casting was announced in May 1973, the week before filming was to begin. Rampling said she did the film because it's poetry. It clearly states love your body, love nature, and love what you come from. To keep costs low, Sean Connery used his own car and drove himself during the production. Borman then gave him half the money that had been budgeted to hire him a car and a driver. The idea was Sean Connery's, according to Borman. Charlie Borman recalled that Sean Connery stayed at the Borman family house in Animo County, Wicklow, Ireland, for the duration of the shoot. At the end of each week, Connery would pay John Borman's wife rent money to cover the costs of keeping him. Connery appears in drag as a bride in one scene. Reportedly, Connery initially felt uncomfortable about doing the cross-dressing sequence. The film is very sexual in nature. A number of women involved in production allegedly said that Connery often pursued sex scenes far longer than the director Borman required. Ostensibly, there is an inside source that there was a clause in Connery's contract that facilitated his sexual activities toward female actors, and it was one of the reasons he accepted the role. Reportedly, Charlotte Rampling looked forward to her sex scene with Connery and was a little disappointed when it was done and over with so quickly. Even though Connery had already reached stardom having portrayed the super spy James Bond, he would go on to be one of the most influential actors of the 80s and 90s, appearing in Highlander, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, The Untouchables, Hunt for Red October, and Finding Forrester. The film was shot in Ireland based out of Ardmore Studios in Bray County, Wicklow. Several locals were hired to help with the production. A group of County Wicklow artisans were also hired to help create the film's futuristic costumes. The costumes were designed by Borman's wife, Crystal. The creations were based on pure intuition. She decided that because the Eternals' lives were purely metaphysical and colorless, this should be incorporated into their costumes too. As the Brutals were much lower, more primitive beings, Crystal decided that they would not care so much about what they were wearing, only that it was functional and comfortable. As stated in the magazine Dark World's quarterly, functional and comfortable costumes ended up meaning that the costumes were extremely revealing. It is the costumes for the brutal exterminators, and Zed in particular, that raise the eyebrows. Thigh-high leather boots, crossed bandoliers, and a pair of shorts that can be described as skimpy. The Brutals and Connery in particular exude a raw masculinity, particularly as they ride their steeds and fire their guns. Financed by 20th Century Fox and produced by Borman's own self-titled company, John Borman Productions, which was based in Dublin, principal photography for Zardoz took place from May to August 1973. It was reported that Stanley Kubrick was even an uncredited technical advisor on the film. Zardoz was shot entirely on location in County Wicklow in the Republic of Ireland. Some of the interior shots were filmed in Ardmore Studios, close to Bray, Ireland. To make the shots of the stone head move into the mouth accurately, the camera was placed at the mouth and tracked backwards, and the film was reversed in the lab. The Irish government initially refused to allow the production team to import prop guns because of terrorist acts at the time. Borman controlled all aspects of the film, including the soundtrack. Borman commissioned Dave Munro, director of Early Music Consort, to write the score. While the film was set in the distant future, the 23rd century approximately, Borman seemed to believe futuristic music would contain a variety of old-world instruments. Borman instructed Munro to use a variety of medieval instruments, including notch flutes, medieval bells, and gems horns. These instruments, plus snatches of Beethoven's Seventh, gave the film a truly unusual soundtrack. As stated by British conductor Sir Anthony Lewis in 1976, Dave Munro did not just emerge into the field of medieval and Renaissance music, he exploded into it. He established a standard that can now never be ignored, and the stimulating shock waves from this explosion will carry far into the future. Along with David Monroe's medieval ensemble, the Zardoz soundtrack features Beethoven's Symphony No. 7 in A second movement, played by the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra and conducted by Eugene Joachim. Zardoz was released in theaters on February 6, 1974 in Los Angeles and New York. When the film was released, it was immediately met with terrible reviews. Along with the scathing reviews, the public reacted very poorly to the confusing world of Zardoz. According to the Starlog magazine article on Zardoz, these reviewers and the general public failed to understand many of Borman's analogies and philosophical statements. The confusion caused word of mouth to spread very quickly that Zardoz was not worth watching, and soon theaters showcasing the bizarre sci-fi were left practically empty. Moviegoers reported that when dissatisfied patrons from the previous showing exited the lobby, they would encourage all those waiting in line to leave. Many times they did. This bad reaction caused ticket sales to drop immensely. As Zardoz had a budget of $1.57 million, it only made $1.8 million at the box office. It was considered to be a commercial failure. The film was later shown on local TV stations as late-night movie fare. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave it 2.5 stars out of 4 and called it a genuinely quirky movie. A trip into a future seemed to be ruled by perpetually stoned set decorations. The movie is an exercise in self-indulgence by Borman, who more or less had a carte blanche to do a personal project after his immensely successful Deliverance. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune gave it 1 star out of 4 and called it a message movie, all right, and the message is that social commentary in the cinema is best restrained inside of a carefully crafted story, not trumpeted with character labels, special effects, and a dose of despair that celebrates the director's humanity, while chastising the profligacy of the audience.
Well, I like the world of fantasy because realism, I think, is becoming boring. I think the real world is quite boring too, really. And so worlds of imagination are much more interesting to me. And Zardoz belongs to that category of films that you've been describing, and we don't really have quite a word for it in the French call it film fantastique, which doesn't mean the same thing as fantasy film. I think that I call them dream films. They're films that come out of the imagination. They're linked to the world of dreams, and some of them are nightmares, of course. And even my realistic films, like Deliverance and Point Blank that you refer to, were films that touched on that world of dream. That I was using nightmare images to link in with an audience's fears, to plug into their unconscious. And I think that's what these pictures do. They do plug into the unconscious, and they're manifestations of that dark underworld.
Overall, Zardoz is one of the most influential cult movies ever made. Its surrealistic imagery and complex themes of sexuality and society are not as subtle as they could be, but the imaginative approach to creating this world is a unique experience only to this film. Would I watch it on repeat viewings? Probably not, but I think everyone interested in obscure films needs to give this one a watch. And this has been Jimmy with The Unusual Mind. If you made it this far, might as well give us a like, give us a subscribe, and share this video with anyone you might know who might want to dive a little bit deeper into the filmography of Sean Connery.